Welcome to the recorded version of Driving Safety for Older Adults, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
And now I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, Lakeland Hogan. Lakeland is gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. Lakeland works to educate professionals, families, and communities on issues older adults face. Lakeland is a doctoral candidate at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, where she is studying social gerontology. She has a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology and a Master's in Business Administration from UNO. Lakeland has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for UNO's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. Lakeland serves as Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Dreamweaver Foundation and is active in the Alzheimer's Association's Walk to End Alzheimer's. Lakeland has a passion for helping others, especially aging adults and their families. Lakeland, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am so excited that you have tuned in for today's webinar. We are going to be covering a topic that is very difficult and one that I get asked about regularly, and that is driving safety for older adults. But before I get started, I just want us to, first of all, take a deep breath. Please relax and enjoy this next hour. But I want us all to take a moment to think about what driving means to us. Let's reflect on how often we get into a car and we go about our daily lives. For many of you, I'm sure driving is a big part of your daily life. It's probably the way you got to work this morning. It's how you get to the grocery store, to church, to your kids' activities. It's how you go out to dinner. I could list many other occasions that you use your vehicle for. And unless you live in a large city or have access to public transportation, you most likely associate your ability to drive with your independence. And older adults feel the same way. So I just had us do that exercise just to make us mindful of what an older adult might be dealing with when a family member wants to limit their driving or take away their ability to drive. And we just need to be sensitive to the issue and keep the older adult's dignity in mind and be respectful when we talk about this topic. Now, when driving becomes an issue for older adults, unfortunately, there's not a perfect formula for when a person should cut back on driving or give up the keys entirely. There's really not a specific age or a combination of health conditions that are the determining factor that the person needs to give up the keys. It really does vary from person to person. I've met many older adults over the years, and some as young as 60 years old are experiencing some health conditions or cognitive impairment that would limit their driving. And I've also met 90-year-olds who are still behind the wheel and are very capable of driving. So again, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this topic. And I really like how expert Ellen Scholes-Davis put it. She said, "Age has nothing to do with determining the capacity to drive. It does have to do with changes in vision, physical skills, such as the ability to reach, turn, and work the pedals, and cognitive capabilities, such as understanding the rules of the road, making quick decisions, and navigating." Ellen is the coordinator of the Older Driver Initiative through the American Occupational Therapy Association, and I will refer back to her throughout this presentation. She worked with us at Home Instead Senior Care on one of our public education programs all about driving, and I really value her insight on this topic. So I'll be sharing some additional tidbits of wisdom from Ellen as we go through today. But as us professionals work with older adults and their families, we can provide guidance on the best way to bring up the issue and evaluate whether or not the individual is safe on the road. And if we do have to determine that they're no longer safe to drive, we want to be able to provide some alternatives so we don't compromise their independence. So I'm going to start by just going through our objectives quickly on the next slide. My hope is that by the end of the webinar, you'll be able to identify potential warning signs that an older adult may be unsafe on the road. I also hope to give a better understanding of aging and the various chronic conditions that can impact driving. And then finally, I want to be able to provide you with as many tools and tips, resources on how to reduce the potential for isolation and depression after an older adult stops driving, and give you some additional tools and resources to help families through this challenging conversation. But I like to start off with some statistics, so I'm going to do so here on this next slide. You may not know that older adults represent the fastest growing segment of drivers, and that's according to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. Current projections suggest that a quarter of all drivers will be over the age of 65 by the year 2025. And although older adults have an overall crash rate that is comparable to that of 20 and 30-year-old drivers, they are the most fragile drivers on the road, and they do have a higher death rate per mile than any other group. And in a survey that we conducted at Homestead, Inc., we found that many older adults view their ability to drive as a means to their independence. And this survey was done here in North America, and of those older adults surveyed, nearly 1 in 10, or 87% of older adults, reported that they are very or totally dependent on having a car and being able to drive. So it is, for many folks, the main source of their transportation. We also found that they appreciate the freedom and independence that driving can provide, and they're simply used to driving. They've been doing it for years and years. I heard an older gentleman say, "I've been driving for 75 years now, and I'm finally getting the hang of it." So it is something that we do from a very young age, and I'm sure all of us can remember the first time we got our learner's permit or our driver's license, and how exciting, thrilling that was, because as a young person, that gave us independence from our parents. So now, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road, when they're having to have a conversation about giving up that driving ability, again, it's associated so closely to independence. And in our survey, we found that older adults also appreciate in addition, we found that nearly half, or 47%, said that they are at least somewhat concerned about losing their ability to drive, and 25% was extremely or very concerned. And what was surprising, though, about our survey is that we found no one's really talking to older adults about their driving. While nearly 1/3 said that a recommendation from family and friends would make them reconsider driving, most of them, or 95% of them, had not had this important conversation. So it seems to us from the survey results that they'd be willing to have the conversation or to make them really think about their driving, but those conversations really just are not taking place. And then one last piece of research I found comes from a recent Columbia University study. And the study found that while unsafe older adults could be a danger on the road, giving up the keys might put the older adult at risk in other ways. For example, older adults who stop driving may be at risk for depression. And in this study, their depression almost doubled once they had to give up the keys. So again, we need to be mindful not only of the safety concerns around driving, but the emotional toll that it might take on the older adult. And that's why it's so important, as part of the conversation about cutting back or taking away the keys, is to provide other transportation options for the older adults so they can continue to engage in their daily activities. And we'll be talking more about that. Our research also helped us identify some common concerns that older adults have about driving, so we're going to take a quick look at that on the next slide. The first concern that's often brought up is driving at night. 41% of older adults surveyed said they are less comfortable driving at night than they used to be, and that's often the first thing that they give up. We also found that 21% of older adults are less comfortable driving during rush hour. 16% listed being uncomfortable driving on highways, and 15% indicated that driving in the downtown area of their community was a place that they felt less comfortable driving. I think I could second that. Our downtown community is a bunch of one-way streets, so I can see how it could be a confusing and challenging place to drive, especially if you have some limitations due to aging. Another common concern for older adults is the impact that a reduction in driving has on them. Just over half relayed that a reduction in driving may make them feel a reduction in their independence, which was no surprise. We talk a lot about the correlation. And 48% of older adults indicated that no longer being able to drive increased their reliance on family and friends. A lot of people talk about how they don't want to be a burden on family and friends, so if they're able to drive and get themselves around, they don't have to request a ride from friends and family. So again, something we need to be keeping in mind is for family caregivers, when they're having this conversation, while safety is a concern, they just want to be sensitive that their loved one might not want to be a burden to them. So when communicating about the topic, if families can communicate that they're willing to help and they're willing to find transportation solutions for them, it might make the conversation go a little more smoothly. And then the final concern we found is revolved around that very conversation about driving. I just mentioned that majority of older adults, 95% surveyed, said they have not had this conversation with family or friends or haven't had anyone in their life suggest that they should reduce or stop driving. And then if we look at those that are 85 plus, of those that we surveyed, 1/5 had reported receiving a recommendation from family or friends. So it seems like the older the individual is, the more likely that their family has had a conversation with them, but that number is still relatively small. So when you think about it, these concerns highlight the importance of families talking to the older adult about the driving concerns and then having a plan in place to really transition them from driving. So I talked about the concerns, but there are also some misconceptions out there about giving up driving. So I just want to touch on those as well. So discontinuing driving can be a scary proposition for many older adults. However, some of the fears of giving up driving are rooted in falsehood. According to driving experts, there are 4 common misconceptions that some older adults have about giving up the keys. So the first is that driving yourself is cheaper than paying for alternative transportation. And if you take some time to think about it, this might not be true for many older adults. When you add up the cost of a vehicle, whether it's leased or purchased, along with the expenses of insurance, maintenance and upkeep, fuel, annual taxes, driving can be a big expense. And it's estimated that 20 to 30% of a family's net income goes towards transportation. And Ellen Scholes-Davis, the expert I mentioned earlier, she gave us that statistic. So if we think about alternatives and how they could be funded, they might come out to about the same cost as owning a vehicle, or could be less expensive depending on where the older adult lives. So the next misconception is that driving is more reliable and alternatives are less convenient. And this could be a tough one to argue. After all, there's a certain spontaneity about being able to get in your vehicle and go wherever you want to go. But if you think about it, vehicles are not fail-proof, and neither are the drivers behind the wheel. So as older adults driving abilities diminish, they may not be able to rely on themselves as much as they used to. And older adults should feel confident in bus schedules and driving services that can be prearranged to help them get where they want to go. And even before an older adult quits driving, families can test out different options with the older adult to find a good fit for the reliability and convenience that the older adult needs. And then the one I hear most often is, I can't give up driving. I've been driving my whole life. Giving up a lifelong habit, again, we've talked about this already, but it can be scary. An individual's identity may be connected to owning a vehicle and their ability to drive. However, those who give up driving can still carry a picture ID. That's a big part of driving, is having that picture ID. And it really can help to reinforce the identity that a license can provide. And if the older adult needs to give up driving, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to give up their car. Especially if an older adult has a car that they've had for a long time or that they have a lot of memories with, they can find people to help them drive the vehicle for them. I had a client several years ago who had an old convertible, and it was one of his prized possessions. He moved into a community setting but really wanted to keep the car and had a garage spot and everything for it. And he wanted a caregiver to take him out and about, and they would look forward to Sunday drives in his convertible, especially when the weather was nice out. So getting rid of the car doesn't necessarily have to be an option if the older adult and their family can find people to drive the vehicle for them. And then finally, another misconception is, I won't be able to go anywhere or see anyone if I give up driving. But when you think about it, owning and driving a vehicle could be more isolating than many alternatives that are available to older adults. An older adult who relies on him or herself and a vehicle may not be as likely to reach out to others for help. So transportation alternatives may open up a whole new world of contacts and friends that being a sole driver of a vehicle would never provide an older adult. So if we're trying to find the positives here, that can certainly be one of them, providing more social contacts. So now that we know some misconceptions, I want to go over the warning signs that it's time to talk about driving with the older adult. Sometimes the signs are subtle and often they come to a blazing attention. However, it's important to remember that we need to collect the facts before making any recommendation about an older adult's continued driving. It may be helpful for family members to ride along with the older adult, especially at different times of day to various destinations close and far, before bringing up a conversation to get a more accurate feel for the older adult's driving abilities. So again, there are some warning signs. We have 10 of them listed out over the next couple slides. So the first is the mysterious dent. So if you see a dent on the older adult's car, it may be something very innocent and could in fact be explainable. A fender bender can really happen to anyone for a variety of reasons. However, if an older adult cannot seem to explain what happened, or if these fender benders continue to happen, further investigation is needed. Next is if they're having trouble turning when backing up, turning around to see, when they're backing up. The issues of aging could compromise an older adult's mobility. However, certain important movements are needed to drive, such as looking over the shoulder. Unfortunately, newer vehicles have those awesome backup cameras that could help older adults compensate for some of these aging issues. But if mobility is becoming a challenge, it might be time to talk to the older adult about modifications that could be made, if at all. Sometimes older adults may have issues confusing the gas and brake pedals. This can be a very dangerous situation, especially for someone who has cognitive impairment or dementia. It can lead to confusion, which could put the older adult and anyone in his or her way in harm's way. So if an older adult is getting confused about how the vehicle operates, again, this is a good time to bring up the conversation and possibly look at taking away the keys. Also, increased irritation and agitation while driving could be a warning sign. Poor health and the pain of health conditions such as arthritis can trigger increased irritation and agitation, and those could lead to poor judgment on the road. So if you notice a loved one having increased road rage or agitation while driving, it could be, again, another warning sign. And then finally, the final one on this slide is bad calls on left-hand turns. Left-hand turns can be tricky and dangerous for older adults who are having trouble focusing on the road. And an unsafe left turn could lead to a serious accident. Unfortunately, I've seen an older adult who's in the left-hand turn lane and sees the cars next to them go ahead, but they don't have a green light like the lane next to them, but they go ahead and pull out anyway. So again, these left-hand turns can be a warning sign if there are issues. And then there are 5 additional warning signs on the next slide here. Parking. When parking has gone awry or becomes increasingly difficult, it could cause damage to the older adult's vehicle or the vehicles around it. So watch for signs that an individual is having problems with parking. Are they parking within the lines? I know some of the handicap parking stalls at the grocery store, I often see the car kind of parked up on the curb. If there are scrapes, perhaps at the gas station, those giant white and yellow poles that are on each side of the gas pump, if the paint from those are on the vehicle, again, these might be signs that we need to have a conversation about driving because parking is becoming more difficult for the older adult. And the next one actually is difficulty staying within the lanes or the lines. If you spot someone zigzagging along the road, it could be a sign that fatigue or poor eyesight is making it difficult to stay within those lines. And then delayed reaction and response time. Safe driving depends on quick reaction times. So issues of aging can slow those response times and create the situation where the older adult causes an accident or is unable to respond quickly enough to prevent a crash. And then driving the wrong speed, driving too fast or driving too slowly could be dangerous. Also, if the older adult has issues with driving speed, especially when the road conditions are icy or rainy, it could be, again, another sign that families need to start having a conversation. And then finally, riding the brakes. It could be a sign that the driver no longer has confidence in his or her skills, and a foot constantly on the brake is also hard on the vehicle. So it could be time to further investigate what's going on. And when we look at these warning signs, if an older adult is exhibiting 1 or 2 even, it's definitely time to talk about driving, and there could be some modifications that could be made. But, if you're seeing all 10 of these warning signs, then you might need to put in place a more aggressive plan to cut back or reduce driving or stop altogether. So these warning signs could be due to conditions that affect the driving abilities of older adults. So we're going to take a look at what some of those conditions might be. We talked a lot about giving up the keys, but the truth is that many older adults can continue to drive safely into their older years. However, when an older adult encounters a certain condition, like the ones on the slide here, it's likely to put their driving in jeopardy. It's important to keep in mind that whether an older adult can continue driving or not may come down to the amount of time it takes for them to make important decisions on the road. And Ellen Scholes Davis, the expert I mentioned at the beginning, brings up another great point. She said, driving is the one IADL, or instrumental activities of daily living, that cannot be modified beyond a certain point. For example, an older adult with declining physical abilities could really take all day or take several hours, minutes to put on his or her shirt and pants. We can modify the process, but we can at the same time give them time to accomplish that activity of daily living. But you cannot take all day to make a left-hand turn when driving. So when an older adult's abilities are decreased, it might really impact their driving. So when you think about the most important abilities for drivers, we think about vision, physical abilities, including reaching, turning, and working the pedals, and then cognitive abilities, including understanding the rules of the road, making decisions, especially quick decisions, and navigating. So all of these elements may be affected by the chronic disease process, some more so than others. So we're going to look at 4 specific conditions that can impact driving. First, we'll look at Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and then we'll talk about 2 vision conditions, macular degeneration and glaucoma. And then finally, I guess medication usage is not necessarily a condition, but a lot of chronic conditions and a lot of older adults in general take medication. So there are certain side effects, certain medications that can compromise an older adult's driving ability. So we're going to touch on that too. So let's start though first with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So Alzheimer's and other dementias are generally progressive diseases, which means that the person with dementia will experience a decline in their abilities over time. And one of those abilities is their ability to drive. A person living with dementia is likely to continue driving in the early stages of the disease, but it's something that the individual and their family needs to pay close attention to. There could be changes in cognition in a relatively short period of time, which might require the person to stop driving. And eventually, as the disease progresses, they will need to stop driving at some point. But once there's a diagnosis, it's important to have a conversation about driving and when it may be time to give up the keys. And on the slide are some signs that it may no longer be safe for a person living with dementia to drive. And this list comes from the Alzheimer's Association, and I won't read them word for word, but I'll go over a couple generalities. These signs really do go beyond just having trouble remembering where they're going in the middle of a trip or where they left their car. It might also be issues remembering directions or learning new driving routes. They may get lost on routines that they were once familiar with, or they might be easily confused when exiting a highway or confused by traffic signs such as a four-way stop. And I mentioned that families should really start planning to take away the keys when there is a diagnosis that is made. And I'm going to share just a quick example of how I helped one of my clients' families through this process. So an adult son, his name was Alan, he contacted Home Instead because he was really concerned about his mom's driving. And his mom, Imogene, had the beginning stages of dementia, and she and her sister lived together. And Imogene was the one that did all the driving for both ladies. And the son was hoping that we could really help transition Imogene out of driving. However, she was adamant that she would not give up her car keys. She would hide them. The son even at one point tried to disable the car, and she got someone out there to fix it right away. So she was very set in her ways and was not going to give her the keys. But we were able to convince her to let Home Instead start driving her to her long-distance appointments. Her hospital that she would go to for doctor's appointments was clear across town, so that's where we started. And eventually, the son was able to convince his mom that she should really only be driving to the grocery store and dry cleaner. And both of these places are locations she could get to by avoiding major roads and intersections. And then, as she became familiar with the caregiver that took her to her appointments, we started to have the caregiver take her to the grocery store and to the dry cleaner. And eventually, Imogene stopped driving altogether. She was really getting used to the caregiver driving her and liked the companionship aspect of it. So again, if the older adult is not in immediate danger to themselves, to those that they're driving around, families can really put a process into place and start over time limiting the older adult's driving. So families can really be proactive and help the older adult ease out of driving. So next we're going to look at age-related macular degeneration. So age-related macular degeneration affects more than 10 million Americans. It's an incurable disease and is the leading cause of vision loss in older adults. In the initial stages, an older adult has increased blurred and fuzzy vision. In the early stage, it may not affect their driving too much. However, as the disease progresses, driving becomes more difficult. Macular degeneration can distort central vision and lead to the loss of sharp vision. You can see on the screen that picture kind of hurts my eyes. I apologize, but I wanted to give you kind of a feel for what a driver might see that has some visual impairment. But if a macular degeneration is causing a problem while driving, the older adult's going to be most likely aware of it, or someone has probably pointed out to them that they're having issues with their driving. But this does not mean that the older adult has to stop driving immediately, but it does mean that we should make sure they get evaluated. So you can start by asking the older adult some questions to gauge how their eyesight is impacting their driving. You can ask about how they're functioning during their driving during the day, during dusk or on cloudy days, on bright and sunny days, and how they are able to get around at night. So if there is an issue, definitely want the older adult to have an eye exam scheduled and talk to the older adult's physician or optometrist about this issue. And it really is best practice in general that older adults should get their vision checked regularly, at least every couple of years, even if the older adult does not have vision issues. Because as we age, we know that our vision does decline over time. So if an older adult is regularly getting their eyes examined, then if they need additional eyewear, pardon me, to assist in their vision, it will likely improve their driving situation as well. So that is age-related macular degeneration, but next we're going to look at glaucoma. So this is another vision-compromising condition, and glaucoma is a group of eye conditions that damage the optic nerve, which is vital to good vision. This damage is often caused by abnormally high blood pressure in the eye. When a significant number of nerve fibers are damaged, blind spots develop in our field of vision. Once nerve damage and vision loss occurs, it's pretty permanent. Most people do not notice these blind spots until much of the optic nerve is damaged and the damage has already occurred. So glaucoma is one of the leading causes of blindness in the United States. It typically affects your peripheral vision, the part of the eyesight that lets you see things out of the corner of your eye. And as you can imagine, that is important when driving because out of the corner of our eye is often how we see if the lane is clear, see bicyclists or pedestrians walking across the street, that sort of thing. And because it affects the peripheral vision, individuals may not be aware of this vision loss until it's really in that advanced stage or when a substantial change in their vision occurs. So while driving, individuals with glaucoma, again, might not see other cars or bicyclists, pedestrians outside of that central field of view. So if an older adult is having some vision issues, there are some questions that you can ask. So you can ask, the older adult can kind of do this question evaluation on their own, or family members can use these questions to ask the older adult. So asking about difficulties in clearly reading and rapidly reading all the instruments on the car's dashboard. So the gas, the speed barometer, or speed dial, all those sorts of things. And then do you have any difficulty reading the signs, or do you notice your surroundings? Do cars on the road appear to kind of pop into vision unexpectedly? While out on the road, do you drive below the speed limit? Do you stay at a speed consistent with traffic? Are you slower, faster? Do you have difficulties positioning yourself on the road with respect to other cars? So staying within the lanes. Are you hitting curbs, sidewalks, that sort of thing? And do you find yourself feeling confused and disoriented on the road? So again, these are a series of questions that families can ask. And if the older adult answers yes to multiple questions, even just one of these questions, it's definitely time to have a conversation about driving to get an eye exam. And for older adults, it may be that vision issues or any medical conditions prevent them from driving for just a short period of time, and they're able to get a kind of medication or have a procedure that could fix the issue and get them back to driving. I actually just was over at my grandma's house last week, and she has an eye infection, and she told me that she really doesn't feel comfortable driving, so she's given that up temporarily until she can get through all of the antibiotics for that eye infection. But then she plans to resume driving once it's all cleared up. So vision issues, while some like glaucoma are permanent damage, other issues may be due to an infection such as the one my grandma has. So it's important to get to a physician to have regular eye exams so that we can stay on top of the older adult's vision, because that is very imperative to driving. And speaking of taking medications, that's the last topic of the 4 that we were going to cover in terms of conditions related to driving. So according to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, about 95% of older adults use medication, and these medications could impair their driving. So doctors should always be consulted about the effects of medication on the older adult. An older adult is at an increased risk of changes in driving ability with an increased number of medications taken. So there's a correlation there. Be sure that older adults read the prescription bottles and take medication as directed. If you've ever read the labels, it does list out side effects. It might say take with food, without food, those sorts of things. So if the medication is not taken the way that they are prescribed, it could have an impact on their driving, and if the side effects say, or the warning labels say, do not take and drive, older adults should be, again, adhering to that. So it's important that the older adult and their family pay close attention to driving and changes in driving, especially when an older adult is changing medication. So if a new medication is introduced or one is taken off of their medication list, and then the family is seeing changes in driving, there could be a related issue there. So again, want to raise that with the older adult's physician or pharmacist. And it's really best to have an older adult's medication reconciled regularly for some older adults, even on a monthly basis, especially if they're having frequent medication changes. And then it might be best to consider a medication management program. There's a great one out there called Simple Meds that really can help with that med reconciliation piece and with adherence. So again, medication can be something that could impact an older adult's ability to drive. So now that we know about the conditions of driving, or the conditions of aging related to aging that could impact the ability to drive, we're going to talk about some roadblocks that families might face. And these may be all too familiar for some of you. So there are many challenges that families can face when driving, but there are three common ones that I really want to touch on. First is transportation and the to and from, which can be a challenge. So according to that Home Instead survey I mentioned earlier, older adults reportedly have plenty of access to other forms of transportation, but despite this access, they tend to rely most heavily on family. About half of them rely on family. About a third rely on friends for transportation. So these issues can make driving distance even more complicated for families. So even if an older adult is living in a care community, he or she may need to get to appointments or want to go on outings that are outside of the community's transportation offerings. And an AARP survey reported that transportation issues are among the most stressful for family caregivers. So if the older adult has to stop driving, he or she, again, may be dependent on family and friends for transportation. We mentioned that a little earlier. But there are resources available out there as alternative options that would free up the family members, the friends, from having to provide transportation each and every time. And I'm going to share some of those options in just a bit once we get to our resource slide. Next, families may feel the stress of a depressed older adult loved one. The recent study funded by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety and the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention revealed that when older drivers stop driving, they're more likely to be depressed and can develop other health problems more so than their peers who continue to drive. So giving up the car keys has been linked to almost, again, a doubled risk of depression in older adults, and researchers believe that this might be partly due to social isolation or a lack of independence that an older adult might feel when they can no longer transport themselves with their car. So it's important for families to help their loved one. Again, I keep saying this over and over, but it really is important to have a plan in place to stay connected. And then finally, families may feel guilt about taking away the keys. Even though families know it's the best decision for everyone, in a lot of cases, family caregivers can feel guilty about their role in encouraging a loved one to stop driving. If they base their decision recommendations on fact and help the older adult find alternate forms of transportation, hopefully it lessens this guilt. But I also hear family members talk about the guilt of not having the conversation soon enough to prevent an accident. So hopefully families can reduce overall guilt by being proactive about this conversation and putting a plan in place. So we talked plenty about the challenges, the roadblocks, so let's get to ways that families can help their loved one. Families, again, should think about planning to stop driving similar to the way that they plan for retirement. You really don't have to do it all at once. You don't decide one day, okay, today's the day I'll retire and not have done anything to plan for it. No, we save throughout our whole lives. We make preparations. We plan for the trips we're going to take after retirement or the hobbies we're going to take up. So we can kind of take a similar approach to driving. We can plan even years in advance. Start having a conversation about, I know Mom or Dad, your ability to drive now is really good, but what are some things what are some signs that you think would be best, if I see these signs, can I bring up the conversation of driving, those types of things. So families can be a little more proactive. So professionals suggest that families are encouraged to get the facts and decide the best course of action. So taking away the car keys should be the very last choice if there's not an urgent need to take away the keys. An evaluation from a doctor or an occupational therapist can provide an objective third-party voice. A driving evaluation can be recommended by a medical professional. Driving rehabilitation programs or the local DMV might be able to assist in this evaluation. I know here in my local community there's a driver rehab program at our local hospital, and they first do an in-office test. They have these pedals that kind of simulate driving, and if they pass that test, then they'll go out in a vehicle with them on the road for a further assessment. So these types of evaluations can really tell a lot about a driver's ability, and it leaves the final decision to a professional, which takes kind of the weight off of the family. And then also, we want families to be able to have resources at hand. So as professionals, we can recommend resources. And I'm going to give you a whole host of resources at the end of today's presentation, but there's one that I want to highlight now, and that's the Car-Fit, F-I-T program. And this is an educational program that was created in collaboration between American Society on Aging, AAA, AARP, and the American Occupational Therapy Association. And I'll share their website at the end. But this program is really designed to help older drivers find out how well their current vehicle fits them. So it highlights actions that people can take to improve their car fit and help promote conversations about driver safety and community mobility. So a proper fit in one's vehicle can greatly increase not only the driver's safety, but others' safety as well. So just a couple examples of what this program looks at is knowing how to properly adjust the mirrors to help greatly minimize blind spots in the vehicle, and then also helping the older adult understand what good foot positioning looks like on the gas and brakes, because if a driver has to reach with his or her toes, it can lead to fatigue and also slowed reaction times. And then the third way is to help is to share conversation starters and strategies for families when talking with their loved ones about driving. The way family approaches this conversation can have a significant impact on the success of the discussion. In just a few moments on this next slide here, I'm going to share some specific conversation starters. And then number 4, we also want to encourage families to include the older adult in the conversation and in the solution. One way to get the older adult to hopefully be more accepting of the changes in their driving routine is to include them in the conversation. So ask the older adult about how they feel about their own driving. And you might be surprised that they'll admit that perhaps driving at night is something they're getting more uncomfortable with, and they might want to stop or reduce driving during the evening time. And then if they're able to have a say in some of the solutions, then hopefully, again, we'll be more likely to adopt the plan in place. And then finally, number 5 here is to encourage families to put that plan into place before taking away the keys. So again, unless the older adult poses an immediate danger to him or herself or other drivers, families shouldn't encourage the older adult to give up keys without presenting a comprehensive plan of alternatives to help give the older adult the confidence that he or she can still be independent and live life the way they want to live. So talk with the older adult about the places that they drive, the times of day they go out and about. That way families can better understand their loved ones' daily, weekly, monthly routines and how they can help them find those alternate forms of transportation. Maybe it's family, friends, neighbors, a lady in the church group that's also going there that could swing by and pick them up on the way. Maybe it's a rideshare service. So again, I'll be listing out some more recommendations here in just a little bit, but those are just 5 quick ways that we can help families. And I do want to share some conversation starters because, again, this can be a hard conversation to have. So on the slide are a few examples from letstalkaboutdriving.com. There's more out there on that site. You can find that site has also some other really great resources. But before the conversation even gets started, again, we want to make sure that the family is prepared. We want to make sure that they've evaluated their loved one's driving, that they're educated about the local services in their communities, identify the person's transportation needs, and then present it to the older adult. And also avoid confrontation. So when challenging conversations come up, it's best to use an I message rather than a you message. So for example, a family member could say, I'm concerned about your safety when you're driving, instead of you are no longer safe to drive. So if we can tell families to really approach it from a place of concern. I'm concerned about your driving. I'm worried about your safety, instead of you're a threat to those on the road. We're going to, again, kind of soften the language that we use, and then stick to the issue. So keep age out of the conversation and talk more about the individual's skills. So again, we talked about how people have to give up driving at various ages, and there's really no perfect formula, but it's really the driver's skills and abilities that will limit their driving, not necessarily their age. And again, we need to focus on the safety and the independence factor. So be clear that the goal is the older driver, if driving has to stop, can continue to be able to do the activities that they enjoy while staying safe. So the family, again, can approach it from a maintaining independence perspective. And then again, be positive and supportive. Recognize the importance that driving has to the older person. Understand that they may become defensive, angry, hurt, withdrawn. It might be a conversation that you have to approach multiple times before they're willing to sit down and talk about it. You might say, I understand that this may be upsetting, or we can work together to find a solution. Again, try to be more proactive, inclusive of the older adult in the conversation. You might even take the approach of, Mom, I'd like to have a conversation about your driving abilities. I don't want to catch you off guard, so I don't want to talk about it now, but how about when I come over next week, we sit down and have a conversation. That way it allows the older adult to really kind of think through what driving means to them, any challenges that they're having, and then it hopefully can make for a better conversation down the road, and they don't feel ambushed. So again, you can see these conversation starters here on the slide. If you want more of them or want some more detailed information, you can go to letstalkaboutdriving.com. But that's one great resource, and I want to share some more before we open it up for questions. So we have letstalkaboutdriving.com. Home care services, most all of them offer transportation. Home Instead, of course, is one of them, but that could be a great option for families. If you're looking for driving evaluation, I know that that is a very long web address, but the American Occupational Therapy Association is a great resource. You can have an older adult kind of rate their performance on that self-rating tool. And then there's also driver improvement courses for older adults, and the Older and Wiser Driver is listed there. And then I apologize, I'm not sure how the car fit. Oh, there's another resource slide. That's what happened. I apologize. So the Car Fit program here is on this next resource slide. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has a great fact sheet out there. And then Bright Focus Foundation also has a great resource called Safety and the Older Driver. And then if you are a clinical professional, there are some great tools and resources out there for you. And then there are also ride-share programs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Uber and Lyft, but there are a couple that are geared specifically towards older adults. One is GoGo Grandparent, and the other is Envoy America. So if you do a quick Google search of those, you can find more information and see if those rideshare programs are available in your area. More urban settings than rural, but Also, the local AAAs, the the Area Agencies on Aging, also often have transportation services for older adults or are able to connect older adults in their area with various transportation programs. And then last time I did this webinar, somebody recommended a great book, Driving with Confidence. So I did want to list that there as well if you wanted to pick up a book on this topic to learn even more. So I feel like I have thrown a lot of information your way, and I'm sure that there are some questions out there, so I'm going to turn it back over for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Lakeland, so much. That was a great presentation. It is time to send in questions. So we've got some in already, but if you have some questions you'd like to ask, please send those in the question box right now. And we will go ahead and get started with the questions. So does an Alzheimer's diagnosis mean the older adult's driver's license should be automatically canceled or revoked?
You know, that's a great question, and it's a hard one to answer because somebody could be diagnosed with Alzheimer's in a very early stage where they are still able to drive. Maybe they can drive short distances, maybe they can drive long distances, but then some people might be diagnosed in more of the moderate to late stages of Alzheimer's where their driving abilities are really compromised. So I would say that's a conversation you want to have with the medical professional involved in the diagnosis because, again, it could be that they're still in the early stages of the disease and they can drive themselves short distances. But when there is a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, the family needs to know that that is a conversation that will need to be had at some point, and families will need to keep a close eye on their older adult loved one in their driving situation because the thing about Alzheimer's and dementia is it can, for some people, progress very rapidly, whereas others, they might live with the disease for 20 years, and it could be a very slow progression. So I wish I had a cut and dry answer for you. That's one of the challenging things about this topic is there really is no one-size-fits-all. But I would check out the Alzheimer's Association's website, alz.org. They have some resources on their site, too, specific to driving. So again, alz.org, and in the search box on their site, you can look for, you can just type in driving, and you'll get some resources there. But good question.
Great. Thank you. And how about as a caregiver, if you have any tips? If the caregiver notices a problem but the family is in denial and says it's fine and okay, any tips for caregivers?
That also is a challenging situation. So I'm guessing that this might be a professional caregiver that's working with a client and they're trying to convince their family, the person's family, that they can't drive it. If that caregiver works for an agency, I would say certainly bring up your concern to the office of that agency. A lot of times they can work with the family to have that conversation, and that way the caregiver doesn't have to broach it. But I would say we talked a lot today about getting the facts. So if you are in the caregiver in the situation, I would maybe start to keep a little journal. Or as the caregiver, when you are going somewhere with the client, offer to drive instead. That way you're not putting yourself in danger. But this can be a very difficult conversation, and the family being in denial is not an uncommon thing. And it could be that the family, they recognize if the older adult has to stop driving, that older adult will rely on them more for transportation, and perhaps that's one of the aspects of the denial piece. So if you are going to broach the topic, have your facts gathered. Maybe you keep a little journal or write down what you're noticing, and then also maybe propose some options for transportation, some alternatives. Or again, if you have in your community, your DMV, if they have a program, or if there is a local area agency on aging, they have any programs or resources, maybe you present those to the family as well so that they have kind of a solution. Because sometimes families tend to avoid topics when they're afraid there's no solution out there for them. So that could be one reason that they're in kind of that denial stage. But I wish that this caregiver the best of luck, and hopefully that those tips are helpful. And I would go check out the resources that are listed on the final resources slides, because those, again, can help you with conversation starters, those types of things that will hopefully make the conversation more successful.
Great. And you mentioned the Home Instead survey. There was a reference of 87% of seniors said they were very totally dependent on their cars. 95% had not had that conversation. And one of the participants would just like to know if those survey results were published anywhere, and if it's possible to get a copy.
Yeah, so those will be out on our Let's Talk About Driving website. So letstalkaboutdriving.com, that was on the first resource slide. We did an executive summary, so it is on there. So if you go again to letstalkaboutdriving.com, you'll find that report there. It did gather some interesting insights. So please feel free to go out there, download a copy, and there's also some, again, great resources along with that website that hopefully will be helpful.
Great. And can you give the name again of the Medication Reconciliation Management Program you mentioned?
Sure, it's called Simple Meds. So just the word simple and the word med, M-E-D-S, Simple Meds, and you can find more information at simplemeds.com. And there's I think an online inquiry, if I remember correctly, form, or you can just give them a quick call. simplemeds.com.
Great. You mentioned that home care services like Home Instead offer transportation. Is that, to your knowledge, is that a standalone service that can be provided, or does that client need to be receiving additional services in order to take advantage of the transportation piece?
That's a good question. I think that it really kind of depends on the agency. Even within our Home Instead network, some offices handle transportation a little bit differently. So some offices will provide strictly transportation services. Others will require maybe a minimum. So it could be that it's a 3-hour minimum, which if you think about it, picking someone up, the caregiver could go into the home, help them get ready, pick them up, take them there. They could sit through the appointment. They could help them run the errands, and then bringing them home, getting them resituated. That 3-hour time frame might kind of fly by. But if you're looking for more of just simple door-to-door drop-off, some of those rideshare programs can be a good resource. And I know that I recently met someone from Envoy America, and I know that their drivers are trained to even go to the door and help the senior to the car, that sort of thing, where some of the other rideshare services might not be able to do so. So I'm just going to do a quick search to get Envoy America's website for you. So it's envoy.com. Oh, sorry, envoyamerica.com is the site. And again, they're not in every state yet, but I know that they're expanding, so that would be a good one to check out if you just needed that transportation option.
Great. We have a couple more minutes left, so any recommendations on where somebody might be able to find a presenter to come to a senior residence to give a presentation like this for older adult drivers directly?
That is a great question. I think that's a great idea, going right to the older adult and getting in front of the issue, being proactive. So if you want to reach out to me, our Home Instead offices across the nation can go out and give presentations on various topics. So I'd be happy to even share this presentation with our local Home Instead office, and they could come out and give that presentation to you. So if you want to send me an email, it's going to be kind of a long one. It's my first and last name, Lakelyn, L-A-K-E-L-Y-N, Hogan. So there's no space, no dot. Lakelyn Hogan, H-O-G-A-N, at homeinsteadinc.com. So go ahead and shoot me a quick email, Lakelyn Hogan at homeinsteadinc.com. caregiver.com. I'd be happy to get you connected. You might also reach out to your local DMV, your local area agency on aging, to see if they have a local organization that could give a presentation, but I think that that is a great idea. I think that education and knowledge is power, and so if we can be proactive in how we educate older adults on driving, hopefully the easier the conversation will be down the road. So thank you for that question.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation, Lakeland. We are at 11 o'clock, and I just want to respect everybody's time. So thank you all for being here today.